Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, today I want to talk a little bit about compromise. And in particular, it's something that has been bugging me a lot about, Kyrsten Sinema would probably be the worst offender of this, but it's a pretty common thing among congressional Democrats, Joe Biden, a lot of, you know, and there's been a lot of talk of, Kyrsten Sinema has made this compromise deal, blah, blah, blah. And you look at it, and in reality, it's really, like, it started out as a really nice, meaty thing, and then the compromise version basically cut out massive chunks. Compromise in giant air quotes. And it's an interesting thing to me because it's kind of like the expertise problem where I you definitely don't want people to just automatically defer blindly to experts. You know? But at the same time, expertise means a lot. And you have to understand that, if you're not an expert of certain things, you're not even equipped probably to properly evaluate them. You can't just have two people make the case for X and Y and then decide which is better. This is a big problem with climate change. It's a big problem with, for a while there was a thing where people were anti-evolution and they were making these arguments. Vaccines are a huge thing now. Like people who just don't have the background making really strong claims that are completely unfounded based on terrible misunderstandings of things. I mean, the worst one there that I keep seeing is people saying that mRNA vaccines are gene therapy, which they absolutely are not. There's zero way to interpret them as such. They are expressing a gene using your cellular apparatus, but that's just what a normal infection would do. And the mRNA is not going into your genes. It's not doing anything permanent. In fact, it's going to get chewed up very quickly by RNases, which are just everywhere. It's a ridiculous thing to even assert. And I got in a really fucking big argument with somebody who was just adamant about it. And it's like, you haven't even, clearly haven't even taken an introductory biology course. Because if you knew anything about transcription and translation and gene expression and what it even means to have gene therapy, you would know this is an absurd thing. So physical pain in my head there. But anyway, getting back to compromise. Compromise seems like a good thing. And I do think it actually is a thing to aspire to. If I want something and you want something else and we have different views or values on stuff, finding an agreement from that disparate set of preferences is good. That's how you get things done. In fact, when Congress was less dysfunctional, that was kind of one of the big things. I mean, now granted, there were earmarks and things like this that, I guess earmarks are coming back, but they were able to sort of grease the wheels, so to speak. But compromise generally seems good. I have to square this with why does it bother me so much that Sinema or, for want of a better term, establishment Democrats are so interested in compromise. And I think the biggest thing fundamentally is not understanding what compromise is. Compromise is I have a position, I have a set of desires, I have a set of expectations, I have a set of things that I find acceptable. You have another set, and we find some kind of, not necessarily middle ground, but something where I give up some things, you give up some things, and together we get more than we would have had individually. That's kind of a compromise. And what we really have instead of that is the Democrats, Sinema being like the poster child of this, but it's a pretty common problem, not just for her. They see where they are. They personally often don't even really seem to have any particular values or desires or goals, but they know their constituents do, or people who are active. And then that is juxtaposed with where the Republicans are, which is, like nothing essentially. Just cut taxes to zero, cut spending to, well, spending, of course. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that the Republicans are supposed to be. Somehow they market themselves as fiscally conservative. Historically, not at all. I mean, it's ridiculous how unconservative they are. They are extremely radical, and yet they, I talk to people and they're very, like, the language is just so ingrained that I know people who, it's like, oh, I'm a conservative person. Well, you're fucking voting for the wrong party if you're voting for Republicans. I'm sorry. They're not remotely conservative. In fact, they are, I would say, radical anarcho-capitalists. I've talked about that many times, but I think that's pretty much where they lay. And there's nothing conservative about that. And in any meaning of the term conservative, they're not conserving the status quo. They're not conserving nature, our environment. They're not conserving anything. They're not being fiscally responsible. So even by their own metrics, they're failing at conservatism. So it annoys me even that they use that term and that people use it with them. It's another thing actually that is very, very frustrating, that they are many, many things that I don't like about them. And this I don't like about them, but they're extremely good at finding a framing for things, at constructing a set of language, of vernacular that puts things in a way that even the people who are acting in opposition to them and who don't want the things that they want are essentially spreading their word because they're using their terms, which are extremely biasing inherently. The death tax, versus the estate tax. There are lots of examples, like all of the shit about freedom versus, like you have something where, like, the concept of freedom is extremely confusing, or confused, I would say. People's take on freedom seems to be, I can do whatever the fuck I want and fuck everybody else. And I think one of the best quotes about freedom is, your freedom to swing your arm stops at my nose, or to swing your fist. I can't even remember the name of the justice that said that, but I think it's a pretty decent one. It's not perfect, but it kind of gets to the essence of why absolute freedom to do whatever the fuck you want without consequence. And that's the other thing. Like, freedom does not mean freedom from consequence. I see people talking about vaccine mandates and people get totally incensed about them. It's like, we're not saying you're gonna get held down and have something injected into you against your will, although it's dumb as fuck that it would ever even possibly come to that. But what we are saying is that you have the choice. You can get vaccinated and participate in life, or you can not get vaccinated and put yourself in a fucking hole and not participate in society or civilization until essentially the pandemic winds down, which is an indeterminate time in the future. I mean, it's not, and the reason for that, of course, is that we live in an environment where, if you have 99 people driving responsibly and you have one person driving drunk and recklessly, ignoring stop signs and lights and all this stuff, that one person's going to wreak havoc on the 99. It's not something that you can really, I don't know how to even frame that in a way that's not just like absurd. Like, obviously your freedom has constraints on it, and those constraints come from the fact that your choices impact other people. And so you have this thing where it's like, I mean, just the way that people are opposed to things like mask mandates, it's just ridiculous and offensive. The thing that kills me there, and I'm a relatively calm person. I'm a relatively even-keeled person. I would say I'm actually a couple standard deviations from the norm there generally. I listened to the Slate Political Gabfest, and yesterday I was listening to it. I do notice the general gestalt of the Gabfest, the people that are on it, is sort of neoliberalism. So I didn't, before I really thought about it, I was probably, would have lumped myself there a little bit, aligned more with it. But since I've reflected a lot and have kind of, like seen where things are and how they go, I'm much, much more opposed to that now than I once was. I don't think it's a good idea generally. But, politically, these are people who would vote Democrat probably consistently, generally speaking, align with me much better than Republicans. But I'm listening to them talk, and especially like David Plotz. I like him in a lot of ways, but he's talking about how horrible masks are. And I'm like, motherfucker, you're not helping the situation. And also, like, masks don't, I'm sorry, they're not that big of a fucking deal. The thing, like having a fucking mask on, yes, you do lose a little bit of nonverbal communication. But people, like our brains are very good at nonverbal communication. I can read people's body language when they're driving, And I don't think I'm exceptional there. I think that's a standard thing that people can do. You can tell what someone's intentions are and what their mood is just from how they're driving. You can look at a car and you're like, that person's on their phone. That person seems drunk. That person is having a conversation with someone. That person's angry. That person's relaxed. That person's too relaxed. You can see that. You can easily see, your eyes, even like your body, you're physically present. With that mask, it's not that big of a fucking deal. And every time I hear people talking about how much they hate it and how much of a, how irritating it is to them, it's like, motherfucker, just chill the fuck out. It's like, what's a bigger deal? Having, being intubated is a big fucking deal. Having people who can't be vaccinated get sick because your stupid ass couldn't wear a tiny little piece of fabric on your face. It's just like, it annoys me. But anyway, rolling back to compromise. So what is so annoying about compromise? Why do I think Sinema, the Democrats and so on, are doing it so badly? Their compromise, their version of compromise is, and I started saying this, but I didn't get past the basis. They have the thing that nominally one would hope that they would want. The Republicans have the thing that they want. And the Democrats, rather than going through the negotiation process and kind of saying, okay, pulling a little bit, like negotiating, if you don't pull, the other person's pulling, you get pulled. Like it's not a complicated thing. If I assert my demands and you push back not at all, then I get everything that I want. That's pretty much how it goes. And so the Democrats are actually not only not pulling, they're actually anticipating. They're like, well, the Republicans will never go for this, so we're just going to give it up before. We're not even going to ask for it. It's like, motherfucker. I'm sorry. It's like, it's my mot de jour, I guess, because mot de jour. But it's like, that's not how fucking negotiation works. You have a position, you fight for that position, and you might even have some sacrificial things. You might even ask for more than you want, probably strategic, because if you do, then when you give up that stuff, you're closer to what you actually wanted. If you start where you think you could go, if you start with what you actually want, you're certainly not going to get it. And if you start, as they seem to consistently, with what you think you can get, you're going to lose even more from that. It's like nobody is making an affirmative case for things that I think are just basic and obvious. Like healthcare. Universal healthcare in some form or another is the de facto standard of the world. Now, there are countries that don't have it, but these are primarily countries that are not our peer nations. And there are many different versions of universal healthcare, but pretty much anywhere else you go, people don't have medical bankruptcy. Per capita, even the bad ones don't pay as much as we do. Like a fifth of our GDP, a fifth of goes to healthcare. And yet, so we're spending a lot. And we're spending, in fact, compared to some countries, like twice as much per person. Some countries, like just 1.5 times or 1.2 or 1.8 times, but we're spending a lot more. And by basically every measure, we suck. We're horrible. We have worse life expectancies that are decreasing. We have high infant mortality, high maternal mortality. We spend more, we get less. It's just a shitty deal. It's one of the most frustrating things when I see the Tories trying to privatize the NHS, because it's like, first off, defunding everything. Defunding the police, massively controversial. To me, it seems like a complete no-brainer, by the way, because every major city, the police force is getting order of $1 billion. Sometimes a couple, sometimes like Phoenix, like 700 million or something that's not quite $1 billion, but approaching $1 billion. I say defund the police and people are like, oh my God, Scott, you can't say that. That's horrible. Nobody's going to go for. Fuck you. Fuck you. These are people who defunded schools. They had no fucking problem stripping education, stripping like environmental protections and things that benefit us all. And that shouldn't be a thing that's just a no-brainer, yet they're able to do it. Now you could argue, okay, the language is bad or what. I don't think so. I think part of the problem with this compromise shit is that people run away from defund the police and abolish the police. And so they're never going to get that because they won't go with a slightly extreme position. Not that I think defunding the police is an extreme position. Abolishing, you could argue, a little bit extreme, although I think also not that extreme when you see what the fucking cops do. They, consistently, even the air quotes good cops are bad. So I have a lot of problems trying to claim that the cops really deserve to exist in anything like their current form. And certainly they don't need the fucking money and power and prestige that they get. They also certainly don't need to be our only, something's wrong. What are you going to do? Call the cops. It doesn't need to be the only thing that you go to. Is some armed, heavily armored thug, arm of the state that can take people's liberty and kill people without consequence. Not the person you need to be calling when somebody has, a psychotic break or something, or drug problems or things that really are fundamentally, if somebody is suicidal ideation, right now there's not a lot of options. People call the cops on somebody who, and then they get into the system and it's bad. There are there are many things like that. If you look at it, literally 95% of what the cops are doing. And I've looked at many different, big cities, small cities, pretty consistent. About 95% of what they do has nothing to do with violent crime. Or maybe it's tangentially connected in a small percentage as well, but the bulk of it, nothing at all. Much of what they do does not need somebody with a gun. Much of what they do doesn't need somebody with body armor or no training at all in mental health. If there's domestic violence and you have armed thugs, now granted, then maybe people are getting violent, maybe you need some kind of, but even then, you're probably not helping things by sending, the primary person, maybe you have somebody who's armed as a backup there, but you send some cops who are not trained in this stuff, and they're pretty much guaranteed to make things worse, not better. So I personally think running away from something like defund the police is part of the problem. If you say defund the police and you put your fucking flag in the ground and you say this is where I stand, then when somebody's pulling from that, first off, you know, it's a fucking flag in the ground. I want to defund the police. Now, if you don't want to say abolish, again, I understand, but the Phoenix police could have, you know, a tenth of their current budget and still do plenty. They don't need, like, literally all the times I see the cops out, they're either doing something which looks highly suspect. I see cops out unmasked in a pandemic, unvaccinated, of course, you know, like less than, something like half, I think it was less, but I'll be generous, I'll say half of cops have actually been vaccinated, and they were able to get vaccinated way before I could. It pisses me the fuck off. It's like, you assholes had the ability to do it. People have to be around you. Like, you know, you're out there talking to people, and people can't exactly like run away from you. You probably shoot them. And you're exposing people, and you're putting people at risk. It's like, it's just, there's no defense of this. So, yeah, I'm looking at that, I'm like, just, so this thing that Sinema's doing, and Sinema is a particularly egregious case, because not only is she doing the pre-negotiation, the sort of, oh, I'm really savvy and I know where they're going to go and I know what they're going to accept, so I'm going to give up everything to begin with, which is dumb as fuck. Nobody who's negotiating negotiates this way. Nobody who has any skill at it, certainly. Yeah, if you give everything already before you even open, you got nothing to give up. But Sinema is a step further, because Sinema doesn't really have any positions of her own. I'm completely convinced now that she basically exists entirely as almost like, almost just pure id. Just pure, like, I don't think she has any reason for being in public office other than she loves attention, probably likes being around money, likes getting people with money to give her shit, and, you know, finds it gratifying. I don't see any other explanation. I've not seen any kind of consistent, coherent worldview there. And, you know, I think it seems pretty clear to me, really, that she's just not got, like, you know, I've got to go to Washington to fight for this, or to fight against that. I don't see any of that. It's just like there to get attention. And the frustrating thing is that these people, like the people on the GabFest, they're like, oh, well, you know, compromise is actually a very high-minded thing, and it's a good thing that, you know, people are trying to compromise and trying to reach. The problem is, yeah, that's kind of true. It's like, the words that you're saying are not wrong, but your application of them to the current situation is dumb. It's dumb, it is ignorant, it is just beyond misguided, too. The situation that we find ourselves in, you have nihilists who are anarcho-capitalists who just want to defund education and defund all kinds of things except the military, gotta put money in there, and cut taxes at the same time, who are somehow allegedly fiscally responsible. That's one team. And then you have the other team who, on paper at least, should be trying to protect things, trying to do good things, trying to help people, trying to make the world better. And yet they're giving up everything before and ultimately not doing that much. I mean, I think also, this is one of the things that I find really just infuriating in the current situation is, well, first off, Trump versus W. Okay. Who's the worst president? I think there is an argument to be made that Trump was more dangerous and more of an existential threat to the future of our country. And I don't think that threat has abated. I think it's still out there. W certainly probably worse in terms of what he actually did, though, because literally, like, you're talking 1 million Iraqi civilians, trillions of dollars, so many lives, so many, you know, injured, whether they're TBI or losing limbs, just serious injuries, PTSD, all this kind of stuff. He did a lot of harm. And also, like, that freezing when he was told we're under attack, I'm sorry, like, plenty of people may freeze in that situation. Plenty of people don't need to be running the fucking country. If you're the person that's running things, you should be in that situation, and maybe you do take a moment, slow is fast and all that, take a breath, wind your watch, and then respond. Whereas he got hit with this and he's like, and just kind of sat there like a moron. And it's just like, yeah, come on. So who's worse? I don't know. I do think there's a reasonable argument to be made that Trump is not the worst president. That being said, all of the things that he exploited are basically still there. The Democrats are in power and just in the Senate by a narrow fucking margin, literally a heartbeat away from losing that one. And they do that, and it's probably going to be, that person will probably be replaced by a Republican, or who knows. But you look at the situation, and it's like, I don't know. It's infuriating because you have people who've talked about how bad Trump is for 4 years, doing nothing to stop him from running again. Easily, like, okay, maybe we couldn't have convicted him at the impeachment, but we sure as hell had a simple majority, and that was all it took to prevent him from running for office again. Just bar him from it. Could have done it, didn't do it. Why? Oh, it's no big deal. We have Breyer, and this guy, I mean, we already lost fucking RBG's seat. And, now granted, I understand we're 6-3, but we're on track to be 7-2. I mean, it does not seem that implausible that Breyer waits until after we no longer have a majority in the Senate. And then we have Senate Majority Leader McConnell, who's like, well, we're 2 years from a presidential election. Gotta hold off on this one. We're not going to approve we're not going to even have hearings. We're just going to hold off. And then 7-2. And the worst part would be that potentially it could be somebody nominated by fucking Trump. If Trump runs in 2024, which it seems like he will, not really a lot of Republicans that are going to be in a position to oppose him. In 2020, he did lose, but he came fucking close. He got more. I mean, I see people talking about like, oh, Biden got more votes than anyone in history, or Hillary got more votes than. You see this, it's like, well, yeah, the population's growing. As a percentage, maybe not. But total numbers, it's a weird game to play, to focus on the number instead of the percentage. But never mind that. Fucking Trump got a shit ton of people. And this is Trump. And yeah, I mean, we pulled that one out, but just barely. Depressingly, like with fucking Biden, who's a raging piece of shit. I mean, like right now there's a recall election for Gavin Newsom in California. And the people, like, there's no viable Democrat to replace him, which seems strategically horrible and dumb. And the Republicans are all just terrible. And so potentially you could very easily have a Republican governor in California post-recall. Like, Newsom needs to be removed and not be governor, but you certainly can't recall him now because what a shitty choice. Anyway, I don't want to get hung up on that, but I want to, just coming back to, actually, I do want to talk about something really quickly. So something good actually happened in New York. This is good being relative, but the governor, kind of piece of shit, also a Democrat. It's annoying how many Democratic piece of shits there are. It's like DeSantis or somebody, you're like, okay, he's a piece of shit, but he's a Republican. At least that's fine. It's not fine, but you kind of expect it. But these fucking Newsom and Cuomo, you're like, you people suck. fucking suck ass. And you're supposed to be the good guys. Now, Cuomo, the thing that's excruciating there is just, I knew, I'm not like hyper attuned to these things, but I knew he was a shithead a year ago, probably more. And, all of these things that finally came out in this report were not new. I mean, I guess there was one thing that was even worse and new, but most of it was just known. And people were defending him. People were like, oh, the homosexual thing. It's like, okay, dude, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck? So anyway, it's good that he's resigned at least, but the situation, I do still hope he's apparently got like something like $24 million in campaign money just sitting in an account. So he could run again, or he could give it to people that are in his favor, who knows what. I hope he gets fucking impeached still, despite resigning. Although I assume part of the reason he resigned is that he made an agreement with some people. Is like, we're going to impeach you. You should probably resign, so we don't. And if you do resign, we won't impeach you. I feel like that's probably the agreement. I would have rather he not resigned and just got impeached personally, but that's me. But if he does, then he can't run again. And if he doesn't, then he can run for fucking office again. And people are so fucking dumb that they could easily support him again. It's the same shit with Trump. Like, yeah, I don't know. It annoys the hell out of me that, and I do think part of it is similarly that the Democrats are not, you have Biden. Now, Biden is not Trump. Biden is not nearly as bad as Trump. But I do remember the audacity of the Grope, the Daily Show thing from, 2015 or so. And you watch it, and Samantha Bee and Jon Stewart are sitting there showing you this stuff, and it's cringy. It's super cringy and uncomfortable. And people are like, oh, he's just touchy. That's just how guys are. Like, making excuses for him. You do that kind of stuff, and then you have no... I see people saying, like, oh, well, the Democrats always get... whenever we have somebody who's bad, they always get taken out by it, and then the Republicans don't. It's like, well, part of it probably is that you don't have fucking high ground to stand on, because okay, you have fucking Cuomo, you have fucking Biden in your, and then you start talking about Kavanaugh and Trump, and people look at that and not unreasonably go like, well, you're just being cynical. Like, obviously you don't really care about this shit. It's one of the most infuriating things about the Kavanaugh thing. People talked so much about how bad he was, and I totally agree. One of the deciding factors when I finally did vote for Sinema, which I'm never doing again, was that she finally, after having her teeth pulled on the subject, said she would not vote to confirm him. And the fact that it took so much effort to get her there fucking sucks and rings a really negative bell in my mind, but she said it. So I was like, okay, I can justify to myself doing this. But yeah, he's a piece of shit. But then you run fucking Biden. I mean, this is a plagiarist who should not have had a political career after around 1988. And yet was vice president and then president. At a certain point, like, I don't know how you can, how can you sit there and say like, oh, well, Trump is so awful. Yeah, Trump is a raging piece of shit. He's a just dirt bag, but so is your fucking guy. And even though your guy is not as bad as Trump by any means, it's not that hard for people who aren't paying attention to just kind of lump them together and say they're equally bad. And, when you have that, it's fucking, so it annoys the hell out of me. The people that are out defending Cuomo, and they seem to have finally tapered off on this, although still you see some. And it's just like... So man, DeSantis is opposed to a mask mandate, opposed to vaccine mandates, all those kind of stuff. And he's out apparently setting up clinics to do monoclonal antibodies, which are much more expensive. Now they work; they're very good. They're probably the reason that Trump is still alive, honestly. But they're very expensive. And if people are freaked out about, mRNA being experimental, monoclonal antibodies are a little bit more cutting edge, I would say. I mean, it's not genetic material in RNA format, but it's definitely not the like least kind of novel thing in the world. And yeah, it's just so dumb that, I mean, don't get me wrong. If I had COVID and I wasn't vaccinated, I'd want the fucking man, load me up. But it just makes you wonder, like, does the guy have stock in the company? Is he, like, what is his incentive to do this? Or is it just that he doesn't want people to die on his watch? So rather than doing the correct thing, which would be mandate, even just fucking allowing, but especially actually mandating masks, mandating vaccines, and then, that would be easy. Instead of that, it's like, you can go drive drunk, but if you do, we're gonna have like the state-of-the-art just emergency trauma team right out there, ready to pick you up and put you back together, because that makes a lot more sense than wearing your fucking seatbelt and driving reasonably and stopping for lights and things. But that, anyway, just annoys the shit out of me. So I think I stumbled upon, while I was talking a minute ago, another aspect of this compromise thing that I do want to tease apart, because I think the aspect with Sinema is a huge problem, and that was the thing that I wanted to talk about today. But I also think like this compromise thing where, that there are people who were deriding certain people for saying, oh, you can't have a litmus test. Can't have a litmus test. Well, if you don't have a litmus test, then how, like, basically it's saying you can't have standards. If you don't have standards, how can you expect anyone else to have standards? If you have no standards, how can you expect anyone else to be held to standards? If you're sitting there saying, like, there are certain things that we're just going to be like, okay, he's doing the weird creepy shoulder thing and the hair sniffing and all this shit, but we're gonna let that pass because, I don't know, some bullshit about socialism or something, which incidentally was the dumbest fucking shit. The fact that, like, I literally saw somebody yesterday who I hope was just a bot or an idiot, but saying, like, how is it that people are talking about Biden like he's a commie, because he's obviously not. It's like, are you fucking dumb? Since FDR, every fucking Democrat has been called a communist. Has been like this has just been the thing. Socialism, ooh. That's just been the thing that Republicans do. Not expecting that makes me question your intelligence and your ability to, I mean, it's one of these things where I saw it coming, and I'm not claiming to be super intelligent or perceptive or knowledgeable there. I'm just claiming that, like, anyone with a functioning prefrontal cortex should see that shit coming. And if you didn't, you should get your head checked out, go in for an MRI. I was going to say NMR, that makes sense. It is an NMR, but anyway, go in for an MRI, get some EEG stuff done, and like see what's wrong with your head. Because if you didn't see that coming, you're dumb. Like, there's something just wrong with you. And then you think about, like, all of this shit. Like, the fact that I am convinced, honestly, like, the reason that Trump did as well as he did, and that Biden just barely scraped through, was that, I mean, as bad as Trump was, people could look at the two and kind of go like, well, Biden's not that much better. Whereas if you had Bernie there, actual socialism, first off, you get the benefits of that. You get student loans being waived. You get free education and healthcare. You get to join the rest of the developed world. You get all of the good things that we don't have. and that people here think are just like insane unicorns, pooping rainbows kind of things to ask, which are just standard the rest of the world. You get those things. Now, yeah, they're going to call him a socialist, but they're going to call fucking Biden a socialist. They're going to call Obama a socialist. They're going to call Hillary a socialist. Like, how many times do you have to fall for this trick? You know, if you're Charlie Brown and that football's there and it keeps getting pulled out of your way, the first couple of times, okay, right? And then at the 10th or 20th time when you fall for it again, like, what is wrong with you? It's on you, you know? So this compromise thing, I mean, I do think, it's like, well, I have mixed feelings on the primary opponent of Sinema last time was Deidre Aboud. I like her. I am a fan. I voted for her. I did a little campaigning for her. Pretty easy like things to do. Very compelling in terms of like the amount of effort that she put in. And, you know, I would talk to people, Democrats, specifically, I talked to a lot of people, but the people that I talked to mostly about it were Democrats. And they're like, oh, well, I like Deidre, but, you know, huge but, you know, the people in this in this state are so racist, or they're so racist, she's white and from Arkansas, but they're so Islamophobic, basically, is what they were trying to say, that blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting to me, like this, I'm not a racist, but those people are, so we're not even going to give them the chance to be racist, and I'm going to preempt it for it. Like, at a certain point, if you're preempting somebody else's racism with your own, or, you know, bigotry, you're the fucking bigot. You know, I'm sorry, like, I understand you think you're, you know, above it all, but you never gave those people a chance. You simply said, like, they're too far, so we're not going to do it. I think this is why Deidre lost, honestly. And, you know, Deidre's not perfect, but I think she'd have been a damn sight better than Sinema. And I do think she could have won the state. And I also, like, you know, this whole compromise thing is like, I'm not a blah, blah, blah. I'm trying, I mean, the problem is fundamentally, and this is a weird kind of compromise, because you're going to compromise yourself and your principles based on your perception of where other people are and who you think is more, air quotes, electable, and things that you have no way of knowing, and things which you have, I would say, definitively demonstrated you have 0 to negative insight into. You know, I mean, like the people who thought Trump, if you thought in 2016 that Trump could not win, honestly, like, just don't fucking try to come up with, you know, your strategy and your deep game theory on like how this is going to play out and all of this. You don't know. Now, I don't know either, to be fair, but I have a little bit more insight than the person who's like, oh, there's no way he's going to win. Yeah, I mean, it's like, do you not talk to people? Do you not, like, what is wrong with you? Do you not see the situation that we're in? And I don't know, it bothers me quite a lot, actually, that people keep making these, you know, I think, I have a weird thing to say here, actually, because I like 538, I like certain things about the modeling that they do, I like lots of stuff about, and I do think they did a better job than most people. But, Nate Silver is kind of the poster child, or I guess not there are many poster children for it now, but Dunning-Kruger is like the disease of our time, much more so than COVID. And he's right up there with like Neil deGrasse Tyson and, God, what is that guy's name? The meme guy. So terrible. Names do not come to me very quickly sometimes. It's really annoying. Dawkins. You know, there are certain people like these who just really don't seem to understand their domain of expertise. And they venture very far from it. But they have the assurance that comes from being within their domain of expertise. And so they're talking about stuff that they know nothing about, but with a certitude of stuff that they have studied, for decades. And it's really bad because, first off, people listen to them and they speak in declarative ways with a ton of confidence. And people aren't, and I include myself in this, people are fucking dumb. Like, if you sit there and you act a certain way, you act certain of something, people will buy it. Even if it's something that's obviously not true. If you have somebody acting in a certain way and, just tons of confidence, people will see that, they'll attach to it, and they'll just assume that person's right. Even if, like, you see something in the video going, like, everybody's walking one way and one person's doing the other thing, people will see that and they'll follow them. It's a weird bit of human nature, and I'm sure it's just like a sort of shortcut for, sometimes if you spent the time to actually evaluate the situation rationally, you'd probably get eaten by the lion before, like, everybody else is running, I'd better run. They look like they know what they're doing, I'm just going to stick with them because they probably do. And that, that's probably evolutionarily advantageous. Doesn't work so well in a complex civilization where, people are full of shit. People are actively lying to you. But anyway, I do think I'm going to have to wrap. So this compromise thing, I'd probably return to it at some point. But it's just, I don't know. I think if you're willing to compromise your principles, you don't have principles. And I think that's one of the key things that I would pull from that. If you're trying to find a compromise deal with somebody and you're making the compromises before they even ask for anything, and you're not doing any kind of tug of war, that's also bad. That's not good. It's not a great thing. Compromise in terms of, like, I want certain things and you want certain things, and we want to kind of work together and find an amicable solution. Maybe neither one of us is, like, super happy about it, but at least it's better than what we had, and it's good. That kind of compromise is good. And I wish people would be a little bit more delicate when they're looking at these kinds of situations and tease that apart and sort of say, like, okay, is this the thing that's just got me, like, oh, it sounds good. What Sinema says, if you just read the stuff that Sinema says about compromise and how, this is how politics is supposed to work, it's like, yeah, it sounds good. It actually, I will totally tell you, it sounds good. And it would make a lot of sense if, you were completely ignorant of, say, the last 50 years of electoral politics, and you knew nothing about where people are, or, like, how any of this stuff plays out, or what she does, or what they do, or any of this stuff. If you knew nothing about that stuff and you were extremely dim, then yes, it sounds great. When you start factoring other things in, it's not so great. So anyway, with that, thank you. Compromise in the right way. Don't compromise in the bad ways. Say Jen.